Marriage is supposed to be built on love, trust, and patience. But what if one simple, absurd detail was all it took to turn happily ever after into a crime scene? Judge Evelyn Carter was a highly respected woman of the law, known for her sharp mind and unwavering principles. Pastor Daniel Wright was a man of faith, admired by his congregation. Together, they seemed like the perfect match. But just 24 hours after their wedding, one ridiculous argument escalated into something far more sinister. Was it really about the cat? Or was this murder waiting to happen all along? Before we dive into this unbelievable case, if you love gripping true crime stories that uncover the darkest corners of the human mind, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way, you'll never miss a case as twisted as this one. And if you think you've heard of bizarre crime motives before, wait until you hear what really led to Evelyn Carter's brutal end. Let's get into it. She was the kind of woman who turned heads without even trying. Judge Evelyn Carter had built her life like a fortress, firm, calculated, and resilient. At 42, she was a force in the Texas judicial system, known for her sharp mind and an unwavering sense of justice. Her courtroom was her domain, and no one, absolutely no one, questioned her authority. But outside the walls of law and order, she lived a quieter life. No children. No distractions. Just her meticulously structured routine, and her Persian cat, Whiskey, a silent observer of her disciplined world. Evelyn had been married once before, but the scars of that union had long since faded into a lesson rather than a wound. She had found peace in her independence, comfort in her solitude. Until Pastor Daniel Wright walked into her life. Daniel Wright was everything Evelyn was not. Where she was structured, he was fluid. Where she relied on logic, he thrived on faith. A 45-year-old megachurch preacher in Houston, Daniel had spent his life mastering the art of persuasion. His voice could move mountains, or at least, it could move thousands to their knees in prayer every Sunday. He was magnetic, larger than life, and deeply admired for his sermons on family values, discipline, and obedience. He had been raised in a household where faith was the air they breathed, and control was the currency of love. His father, a stern minister, ruled with an iron fist, and Daniel had learned early that in order to lead, one must first command. And so he did. His congregation hung on his every word, his presence filled every room he entered, and his influence stretched far beyond the pulpit. It was at a church charity event where their worlds collided. Evelyn, a woman of intellect and reason, found herself drawn to Daniel's passion, his certainty. He saw the world in black and white, so different from the shades of gray she navigated daily in her courtroom. And for Daniel, Evelyn was unlike any woman he had ever met. She was powerful yet graceful, firm yet compassionate. He admired her independence, her confidence, at least, at first. Their love story unfolded like a carefully written novel. Dinners at upscale Houston restaurants, long conversations about faith and justice, quiet moments where the line between their differences blurred just enough to make them believe they were meant to be. To the outside world, they were the perfect match, two leaders, two minds, two souls intertwining in purpose. But love is never as simple as it seems. A grand Texas affair, complete with a sprawling estate, white roses lining the aisles, and a guest list that read like a who's who of Houston's elite. Judges, politicians, megachurch pastors, business magnates, all in attendance to witness the union of two respected figures. To the world, this was the merging of power and piety, law and faith. Evelyn, radiant in her custom-made gown, smiled through the day, convinced she was stepping into the life she had always envisioned, a life of love, partnership, and unwavering devotion. But beneath the grandeur, something was off. Daniel, the man who had once showered her with admiration, seemed distant. Not cold, not unkind, just off. A fleeting glance here, a tensed jaw there. It was subtle, but Evelyn noticed. Then there were the smaller moments. His hand tightening around hers just a second too long when she spoke. The way his eyes flickered with disapproval when she laughed a little too freely, when she spoke with a confidence that outshone his presence. The small corrections, the light admonishments, you shouldn't do that, maybe you should say it this way instead. At first, they were insignificant. Almost endearing. A man with strong opinions. A husband taking his role seriously. But there was a moment, brief, but undeniable. As they stood at the altar, exchanging vows before God and the sea of guests, Evelyn caught something in his expression. Not joy. Not nervous excitement. Something else. Possession. It passed in a heartbeat, but it left a whisper in her mind, a whisper she pushed aside. Love required compromise. Marriage required trust. And so she smiled, brushed away the nagging unease, and sealed their fate with a kiss. The guests cheered. The cameras flashed. And Evelyn Carter became Mrs. Daniel Wright. But fairy tales have a way of turning into cautionary tales when you least expect it. The honeymoon phase should have been blissful. It should have been laughter, stolen kisses, the beginning of forever. Instead, it was a series of almosts. Almost perfect. Almost right. Almost everything Evelyn had hoped for. But then there were the adjustments. Daniel preferred dinner at a certain time. Evelyn adjusted. Daniel disliked how she worked late. She adjusted. Daniel thought she should tone down her assertiveness, be softer, more wifely. She laughed it off. He didn't. Day by day, the balance between them shifted. Small comments turned into larger discussions. Larger discussions turned into quiet disapprovals. Evelyn had spent her life in control. She had fought for her independence, for her voice. But now, standing at the edge of this new chapter, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A loss of control. And control, she knew, was everything. The house was quiet. Too quiet. For most, the first night as newlyweds is filled with warmth, the start of forever wrapped in soft whispers and unspoken promises. But for Judge Evelyn Carter and Pastor Daniel Wright, the silence was something else entirely. It was a tension, thick and unyielding, pressing against the walls of Evelyn's home, the place where she had built her life, long before Daniel came into it. She had made it clear from the beginning. They would live here. Not in the parish home, not in the shadow of his church. Her house. Her rules. Daniel had smiled at first, nodding as though it was of little consequence. But inside, something had shifted. A man of his standing, a husband, was supposed to lead. And yet, here he was, walking through hallways he had no say in, sitting on furniture he hadn't chosen, eating at a table that belonged to another. His name wasn't etched into these walls. His presence wasn't woven into this space. It was hers. Always hers. And that didn't sit well with him. Whiskey. The cat had been there before him, and that, too, unsettled Daniel. A pet. A creature. Given more consideration in this house than the man who now shared her bed. At first, it was just an annoyance, the fur on his neatly pressed suits, the soft jingle of a collar in the dead of night, the way it perched on the couch as if it, too, had a claim to this home. But Daniel was patient. He had spent years shaping his congregation with words alone, and he believed he could shape Evelyn too. He brought it up lightly the first time, as he straightened his tie in the mirror. Maybe we should keep the cat out of the bedroom. Evelyn, slipping on her earrings, barely looked up. It's just a cat, Daniel. She laughed. A soft, dismissive laugh. And just like that, something inside him curdled. The days passed, but the irritation festered. Each time whiskey brushed against his leg, each time he found a stray hair on his clothes, each time the animal curled up beside Evelyn at night, it felt deliberate. Like a challenge. Like a test of his authority. One evening, as Evelyn poured herself a glass of wine, Daniel cleared his throat. I think it's time to find the cat another home. She raised an eyebrow, amused. What? I don't want it in this house. His voice was steady, measured, but there was an edge to it. It's disrespectful. Evelyn set down her glass, turning to face him fully. Disrespectful? Daniel, it's a pet. It's not a threat to you. It's in our bed. It's on our furniture. His jaw tightened. A wife should respect her husband's wishes. The shift in tone was subtle, but unmistakable. Evelyn, the woman who held court over men twice his stature, the woman who never bent beneath the weight of pressure or intimidation, felt her spine straighten. She had been here before. She knew this road. And she had vowed never to walk it again. The argument started as a murmur, but like a fire starved of air, it roared to life the moment Evelyn pushed back. She refused. Simple. Clear. Unyielding. "I'm not getting rid of whiskey," she said. "Not now, not ever." Daniel's fingers curled into fists. "Evelyn, I am your husband. I deserve." "You deserve what, exactly?" she cut in. "Control." His breath came slow and deep, measured only because he knew his temper. He had seen his father lose it too many times before. The shouting. The rage. The fear it left in its wake. He wasn't that man. But standing here, looking at Evelyn, her defiance, her unwavering confidence, he felt that same fire claw at his insides. She wasn't supposed to challenge him like this. A wife was supposed to listen. A wife was supposed to follow. His voice dropped to something low, dangerous. "You think this is funny, don't you?" Evelyn crossed her arms. "I think this is ridiculous. It's a cat, Daniel." And there it was again. Dismissal. Indifference. As though his feelings, his position, meant nothing. A surge of something dark and unshakable rose in his chest. This wasn't how it was supposed to be. He had married a woman of faith. A woman who was supposed to build a home beside him, not stand in opposition at every turn. His voice was sharp now, cutting through the space between them. "You don't respect me." Evelyn let out a breath, exasperated, tired. "Daniel, this is exhausting." But he wasn't finished. "This isn't just about the cat," he pressed. "It's about everything. You don't listen. You don't compromise. You wanted this marriage on your terms, your house, your rules, your life. Where do I fit in, Evelyn?" For a moment, there was silence. A moment where the weight of his words lingered between them, daring either to move first. Then Evelyn spoke. Calm. Certain. "This marriage is a partnership, Daniel. Not a dictatorship." And that was the moment something broke. Not in the house. Not in the air between them. But inside Daniel. Deep, unrelenting, and irreversible. The night stretched on. The argument ended, but the damage had been done. The quiet between them was no longer the peaceful kind, it was the heavy kind, the suffocating kind. Daniel sat in the darkened living room, staring at the wall, his mind racing. He had built a life on discipline. On control. On obedience. And yet, here he was, powerless in his own home. Not his home. Hers. The thought sickened him. Upstairs, Evelyn lay awake, staring at the ceiling, whiskey curled against her side. She had faced down criminals. She had sent dangerous men to prison. She had never once let fear dictate her actions. But that night, as she listened to the silence pressing in around her, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. A whisper of doubt. A flicker of something else. Something that told her this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The house was still. Evelyn Carter lay in bed, her breath slow and steady, the weight of exhaustion pressing her into the mattress. She believed the worst of the night had passed. The argument, heated, tense, was over. Daniel would get over it. That's what she told herself. She had faced opposition before, seen men posture and fume, only to let their anger simmer into silence. Tonight would be no different. She closed her eyes. In the living room, Daniel sat unmoving, staring into the darkness, his hands gripping the armrests of the chair. A lifetime of discipline, of control, of structure, challenged. Over a cat. His own wife, the woman who had vowed to honor him, had laughed at his authority. Dismissed his wishes as if they were trivial. As if he were trivial. The thought gnawed at him. Grew inside him. What kind of man was he if he allowed this to stand? And then, something inside him broke. His movements were slow. Methodical. Not rushed, not reckless. He moved through the house with a chilling calm, his bare feet making no sound against the hardwood floor. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open with the lightest touch, stepping inside, his eyes adjusting to the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. There she was. Asleep. Vulnerable. For the first time since their wedding, she looked small to him. Not the formidable judge, not the confident woman who had commanded a courtroom. Just flesh and bone beneath crisp sheets. His breath came steady as he reached for the pillow. The first press was gentle. Testing. She stirred slightly, but did not wake. Then, with a sharp intake of breath, he pushed down harder. Evelyn's eyes shot open. The struggle was immediate. Violent. Her hands clawed at his face, nails raking deep into his skin, leaving burning trails of pain in their wake. She kicked, twisted, fought with every ounce of strength in her body. But Daniel was bigger. Stronger. Fueled by something she couldn't match, rage. A rage that had been simmering beneath the surface, waiting for the moment to explode. The pillow muffled her screams, but not the sound of the struggle. The frantic thrashing of sheets. The bed frame groaning under the violent shifting of weight. And then. The breaking point. Daniel felt the moment it shifted. Evelyn's resistance weakened. Her hands, once ferocious in their fight, grew sluggish. But she wasn't gone. Not yet. His breathing was ragged, his own strength beginning to falter. This wasn't working fast enough. Panic gripped him. His mind raced. And then, without hesitation, he moved. The pillow dropped to the floor. His feet carried him out of the bedroom, down the hall, into the kitchen. His hands knew what they were looking for before his mind even fully processed the decision. The knife. Cool metal against his palm. When he returned to the bedroom, Evelyn had rolled onto her side, coughing, gasping for air. She looked up. And in that split second, she saw it. Not just the blade. The truth. Daniel Wright was not a man of God tonight. He was a man of death. The first stab was fast. Brutal. The second came before she could scream. 17 times. By the time the final thrust of the blade struck her chest, the fight had left her. Silence. The weight of his own breathing filled the room. And then, as if waking from a dream, Daniel stepped back, looking down at his wife's body. The blood. The sheet soaked in crimson. His hands trembling, slick with what he had done. There was no taking it back. No praying this away. Evelyn Carter was dead. And he had killed her. Minutes passed. Maybe hours. Daniel sat on the edge of the bed, staring at nothing, the weight of the night pressing down on him. A man of God. A preacher. A murderer. His pulse was calm now. His mind clear. This wasn't over yet. There was work to do. The cleanup was precise. First, he changed his clothes, stripping the blood-stained fabric from his skin. Then, he moved her body, wrapping it carefully, almost gently, as if he were tucking her in for the night. He loaded her into the trunk of his car. Drove away into the dead of night. A deserted stretch of land, miles outside of town. No cameras. No witnesses. The ground was hard, unyielding. He worked quickly, the chill of the night air biting at his skin as he dragged her body from the trunk. By the time the first streaks of dawn kissed the horizon, Evelyn Carter was gone. Gone from her home. Gone from her courtroom. Gone from the life she had built. And Daniel Wright was a widower. A grieving husband. A man who had lost his beloved wife in a senseless act of violence. At least, that's what they would believe. He returned home, stepping inside as if nothing had changed. The house was silent once more. But this time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was peaceful. The weight that had burdened him for weeks was gone. He made his way to the kitchen. Fed the cat. Poured himself a cup of coffee. There was a sermon to prepare. A congregation to inspire. And in just a few hours, he would stand before them all. Holy. Righteous. Untouched by sin. For who could ever suspect Pastor Daniel Wright? Monday morning arrived like any other. The courthouse bustled with activity, judges, clerks, and attorneys moving through their routines. But something was off. Judge Evelyn Carter's courtroom sat empty. The chair where she presided, vacant. The gavel she held, untouched. She was never late. Never absent without reason. Calls went out, first to her office, then to her home. No answer. Her closest colleagues exchanged uneasy glances. Something wasn't right. By noon, concern turned into alarm. By 3 p.m., the police were called. Officers arrived at Evelyn's home within the hour. The house was quiet. Too quiet. No sign of forced entry. No sign of struggle. Just an unsettling emptiness. Her purse sat on the kitchen counter. Her car still in the driveway. Her phone left on the nightstand. Everything was in place, except for Evelyn Carter. The only living soul in the house was her cat. Whiskey. And Whiskey was hungry. When questioned, Pastor Daniel Wright appeared composed. Concerned, even. She went out of town, he said. A last-minute trip. We had a disagreement, she needed space. A reasonable explanation. Except it wasn't. Detectives pressed for details. When did she leave? Where did she go? Who did she contact? Daniel's answers wavered. She packed quickly, didn't say much. I didn't ask. Vague. Suspicious. But not enough to arrest him. Not yet. Detectives took a closer look. Inside the house, they noticed small inconsistencies. A faint stain on the carpet. Something wiped clean, but not well enough. The bathroom drain, recently scrubbed. A single scratch on Daniel's forearm. Alone, these were nothing. Together, they painted a picture. A picture of something hidden. Something wrong. And then, the biggest mistake of all. Security cameras never sleep. 4:13 a.m., October 13th. A figure appears on surveillance footage. Daniel Wright. A black trash bag in his hands. Heavy. Weighted. He moves quickly, scanning the empty street before tossing it into a dumpster 3 blocks from his home. He thinks no one is watching. But the cameras catch everything. Investigators move fast. The dumpster is searched. Inside, among the trash and debris, they find it. A nightgown. Not just any nightgown. Evelyn Carter's nightgown. And it is stained with blood. Daniel Wright is brought in for questioning. He sits across from detectives, hands clasped, a rehearsed look of grief on his face. This is a mistake, he insists. I had nothing to do with this. The room is silent for a moment. Then, a folder is placed on the table. Inside, photographs. Evidence. The nightgown. The blood. The surveillance footage. And finally, the detail he never considered. Whiskey. Forensic analysis had uncovered one final damning clue. Evelyn's fingernails, splintered, broken. A desperate fight for survival. And beneath them, tiny traces of fur. Whiskey's fur. The same fur found on Daniel's discarded, bloodied clothes. The room is suffocatingly still. Daniel opens his mouth. Closes it again. His hands tremble slightly. For the first time since this began, he has no words. Because the truth is undeniable. And it is written in blood. The courtroom is packed. The air, thick with tension. Reporters whisper. Spectators lean in. Cameras flash. On one side, Evelyn's colleagues, friends, and family. Faces etched with grief and quiet fury. On the other, Daniel Wright. Shackled. Expression unreadable. The trial begins. The prosecution wastes no time. They paint a damning picture. A preacher who thrived on control, until he lost it. A man who believed his word was law, who saw defiance as betrayal. Not a crime of passion. Not a moment of madness. But a deliberate, premeditated act. They show the evidence. The blood. The surveillance footage. The scratches on his skin. And finally, the cat. Whiskey. The last witness to Evelyn Carter's final moments. The defense fights back. They plead temporary insanity. Daniel wasn't himself, they claim. A good man pushed too far. A moment of weakness. A lapse in judgment. A crime, yes, but not one of intent. They urge the jury to consider his years of service, his devotion to faith. But the jury isn't swayed. Not by the words. Not by the pleas. Because the evidence speaks louder than the defense ever could. The verdict is swift. Guilty. First-degree murder. The sentence, life without parole. Daniel Wright will never leave prison walls. His sermons, silenced. His control, stripped away. He sits alone in his cell. A Bible in his hands. But the words, once his weapon, now offer no comfort. Beyond the courtroom, life moves on. Evelyn Carter is gone. But her story isn't forgotten. And neither is her beloved whiskey. Adopted by Evelyn's sister, the cat finds a new home. A new beginning. As for Daniel, his final image isn't one of power or righteousness. Just a man. Alone. And justice, served. One moment. One argument. One life, lost forever. But was it really about the cat? Or was this about something far darker, control, power, and a man unwilling to let go? Evelyn Carter was a woman of strength, intelligence, and independence. Yet, in the end, none of that could save her from the man she trusted most. Was this crime inevitable? A tragedy waiting to unfold? Or could it have been stopped? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you crave more gripping true crime cases, subscribe to True Crime Stories Arena so you never miss another shocking story. Because the truth is often stranger, and more chilling, than fiction.